welcome to the T-Fix podcast. I'm Leona Liu, here with my co-host, Geoff Norman. Geoff, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's pretty warm in Chicago today, but other than that, surviving.
Subsisting, barely.
Yes, I'm
indoors.
here. I am here, alive. Extremely warm.
And what are you drinking?
So today, I am drinking an Anxi Tieguanyin, and it is a Gaoshan, which is from a high, so it's from the elevation 1,080 meters, and this is...
Meters. What is that in American altitude terms?
I will check later. I'll check on the second half of the show when I can Google that.
Postscript.
Yeah, we will fill that in later with some edits.
Yeah.
But this is what the tea looks like.
Okay.
So it's a lightly oxidized.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a very green Tieguanyin.
Yeah, it's a lightly oxidized Tieguanyin, and it is from an unknown garden. So no surprise there, right?
Iron goddess of mystery.
Yeah. She's super mysterious. But I feel like most of... So I'm going through some teas in my collection, and I'm realizing that most of them are lightly labeled. So...
Not even Google Translate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking something that decides to call itself an oolong, but that is going to be the point of our discussion. I am drinking I'm drinking an oolong from the Junchiabari Garden in Nepal. And
cool.
It is absolutely nothing like a Tieguanyin.
So tonight we are talking about Oolong versus Oolong. So the battle will begin.
Yep, and
I'm just gonna make some here.
And what we mean by that is there are teas that call themselves oolongs, but they aren't really oolongs in the strictest sense. And
right.
I, as well as a few other people smarter than I am, have written on the subject at great length about teas that call themselves oolong, but in reality are only semi-oxidized teas, but don't go through the strict processes that Chinese or Taiwanese or some Indonesian oolongs go through.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And hopefully
just a quick little history on the three different theories of the origin of oolong. Man, this water is really hot. I was like, something just burned me. That's the water. Okay.
I have something to tell you about the theory of... Ow!
I'll be back in 30 minutes.
Allow me to share the legend of the third degree burn.
There will be pictures to show later.
Pictures.
I will Instagram them.
This one looks like Jesus.
Isn't it cool? Please like this picture. So there's kind of three theories about the origin of oolong tea. And one is kind of based on the shape of oolong, the traditional style oolong. Another is more based on the location. And the third is, I would say it's based on like folklore. So
yeah.
The first one being the shape is originally it came from a tribute tea. So this is a tea that government officials would receive, and this tea is actually a dragon phoenix tea cake.
Oh,
and this TK came from Ui Mountain in that region, and it had a really nice and distinct earthstone taste. And at that time, a lot of the teas, or most of the teas, were like green teas. So this had a very distinct and different taste from a lot of teas in that were being consumed at the time.
Right.
And then when loose leaf teas came back into fashion, the original tea was then made into what we now know as traditional oolong. And so it's like this longer, spirally shape, and it's dark in color, and so it looks like a oolong, a dark dragon.
A black dragon.
Or
Yeah,
like,
I heard that
yeah.
oolong means dark dragon or black dragon.
Yep. So one is it's based on its shape. So if you look at a traditional oolong, a darker, heavier oxidized oolong, it does have that nice, like, spirally shape.
Yeah.
And then the second is based on just the Wui region, where oolong is just named after the mountain where it was originally produced. So the original, the traditional oolong was produced.
Interesting. I haven't heard that theory.
Yeah, and then the third is this folklore theory, where there was a farmer by the name of Oolong or Sulong or Oolong, or one of the variations on the name that sounds like oolong. How convenient. And so he was a tea farmer who had picked some tea, and he was going to take it home to process, and he ran into an animal. It's always like he ran into some animal. It's a snake or a deer or like he's out in the fields and he runs into an animal. And so he, for some reason or other, isn't able to take this tea home or process it. And so it sits and goes through a semi-oxidation process. And then, in fear of like losing his harvest, he goes and uses the tea and processes it anyways, and takes it to the market, and it's a huge hit. And so, according to this folklore, the oolong name is named after this farmer. I don't know how he got the word out. I don't know how he was like trademarking it at the time. Like, hey, my name is like Oolong, or my name is Oolong, and like, this is my tea.
My name is. No, I heard that similar legend, but I heard a version where it said that he had fallen asleep under a tree and the leaves oxidized, and then he had to hurry back and then said, well, I guess I'll process them anyway or something.
Yeah. So I think it would be interesting to figure out how many like variations, like how are the different ways that you, being a tea farmer, could leave your tea out and let it oxidize, semi-oxidize, and then process it to become oolong tea. 1, you run into a snake in the forest. 2, you run into a deer in the forest. 3, you fall asleep under a tree in the forest.
It's funny that you mention how a farmer could end up with semi-oxidized tea. I actually know of a farmer that how when they're putting the bamboo platters full of leaves, they basically leave them to wither in stacks, basically on shelved stacks. And there was a case of 1 or 2 of those bamboo trays being forgotten before they were going to be changed into a regular Taiwanese shanlin tea. So they forgot, and they had already 70 to 80% oxidized, and they were like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Quick, kill green it! And they made a red oolong by accident.
That's amazing. So it's like a limited run.
Yeah, it was a limited run. A company called Echo Cha had picked it up, and it was delicious. But I like happy accidents. I'm kind of a happy accident, waiting to happen.
So this is the folklore in real life, essentially.
Exactly.
That's funny. And so this traditional style of oolong, which is darker and heavier oxidized than the type of oolongs that we kind of now associate with like a greener oolong,
Right.
like the Tieguanyin. So that kind of shifted in like the early 1800s, where the
No.
Enshi region. No.
The ball. Well, let me think here. The ball rolling stuff, at least in Taiwan, didn't actually get started until about the 1920s. I'm not sure what it was or what the
Yeah.
case was in China, or at least in the Anxi region or in Wuyi proper. But the reason why the pretty much Fujian province and the Fangwang area in Guangdong still do it strip style is because they were unaffected by whatever the trend was. So I don't know if it was the 1800s or if it was just the early 1900s, but around the time when the Japanese were doing their thing, that's when necktied ball-rolled oolongs came into vogue. At least in Taiwan.
I think when it moved to Taiwan, I believe it was later.
Yes.
So the Anxi region did adapt this like greener style, the newer style of processing or creating oolong from the traditional Wuyi methods.
Yep.
And so if you're looking at an oolong, you can kind of know which region, you can identify which region it's from based on the shape and how heavily it's oxidized. So if you see an oolong kind of in that dark dragon shape, Wuyi. And if it's a green kind of like rolled ball or lighter oxidized, Anxi.
Yep. Although a lot of people who are like major Tieguanyin snobs, and they're out there, they're about as hardcore as the Pu'er snobs. They don't actually like looking at the radioactive green Tieguanyins because it basically means that they whoever the gardener and processor were, they actually skipped a few steps to get it out on market quicker, and the result is that because Tieguanyin traditionally is supposed to be about somewhere between 30 to 50% oxidized or roasted multiple times, much like Wuyi oolongs are, but not as heavily roasted. Because the Wuyi oolongs are like the roasting process and the rolling and roasting, roasting alternation takes about 6 months. And Tieguanyin, at least traditional Tieguanyin, is just as laborious. So the fact that there are greener style Tieguanyins out there, I mean, they're still using the Tieguanyin cultivar, but the fact that they are as green as they are means that they were basically being pushed out on the market quicker than they should have been. If you want if you want the original way it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be a little bit darker. The leaves are supposed to be more purple in appearance, and there should be a little bit of a vanilla roast note to it as well.
Like a creamier
Kind of
flavor
thing.
to it. Yeah. So with Tieguanyin and oolongs, there's a kind of a time between processing where it's picked like in the afternoon and then processed kind of all through the night, where it goes through this semi-torturous process.
It's a semi-torturous process, not just on the leaf, but also on the processor.
That's true.
I knew a guy that went through the process, and you don't sleep during the process of a batch. You are only taking naps in intervals because you can't stay asleep longer than after the process is gone, because you need to be right there, right on time for whatever the next stage is.
Yep. And it's different for depending on like the weather and what time of the year and the temperature inside, the temperature outside. It's a lot of work.
I agree.
It's a lot of work. And so I was reading a little bit about this process, and one farmer had described it as bringing this tea like to life and then like killing it again. So it's like you bring it back to life.
Summon dragon, slay dragon. Summon dragon, slay dragon.
Yeah, a little bit. It's like, yeah, you need to like bring it back to life by, bruising it, and then you let it sit, and then you let it die a little bit. So it's this like process that you need to watch very carefully, and depending on who is who's like processing it, it varies depending on each farmer and in terms of what their personal preferences are. So each place has kind of their own way of going ahead and processing and timing between all of these steps.
Yep. There's anywhere between, I believe, 12 to 15 steps in producing a Tikuan standard Tikuan yin, even today. I mean, and as to what, because originally Tikuan yin was strip, not ball rolled like you know it today. And I only know of one company that deals with one gardener who do their Tikuan yin in the strip style. It's delicious. But what's funny is those are the three factors that determine an oolong, a traditional oolong as being an oolong, are the, mid-oxidation or partial oxidation, mid-oxidation, or almost full oxidation are part of the process, but bruising and a kill green process are also considered mandatory. Well, bruising, rolling, withering, bruising, rolling, withering, yada, yada, yada. Rinse, repeat.
Yeah, it's probably the most labor-intensive of all of the teas.
Yep.
Just in terms of the amount of processes that need to happen within a short amount of time.
Oh, yeah, and which is why with these semi-oxidized teas that exist outside of China, Taiwan, parts of Indonesia, and so on, they don't meet the strict criteria required to be called oolong because they don't go through all of these strict processes. In the case of parts of India, all they do is they basically do whatever they're going to do when they're processing a black tea, which is stick the leaves in a giant oven. And instead of having them go all the way through before they start the drying process, they just take it out before it's completely done and go, "Hey, we made an oolong!"
Right, and that. I would imagine if I was a farmer and I was making oolong, and there were other processes out there that were also marketing themselves as oolong, but it's in terms of the number of steps and the labor intensity that's involved with the processing and the production of their quote unquote oolong.
Right.
I would be pretty like, hey, you can't use that term because what I'm doing is actually oolong.
You can't do
Excuse me.
that. That's not fair.
A little bit, right? It's probably like eight more processes or eight more
processes
steps
at the very least. But
right.
at the same time as I'm deriding semi-oxidized teas calling themselves oolong, I'm not saying that those teas don't have merit, but I don't think that they could be considered traditional oolongs. I've written, I think, 3 articles on this very subject that they could either be called gray area teas or they could be called or they could be called oolongs with the double O, whereas the traditional oolongs could be called woolongs.
Oh, yeah.
So the true black dragons can be black dragons, and the others can be Western dragons.
Oh, the Western way of writing oolong.
Yeah,
the more modern way.
Yeah, considering the fact that everything from the Tibetan border on is considered the West, if you're to basically go with the Journey to the West definition of what the West is. Yep. So basically anything that's along that Himalayan crescent that are doing semi-oxidized teas, you can consider themselves Western style oolong with the double O's instead of the woo. Woo!
I wonder if there's another name that we could. I guess that would be a good distinction. Mm-hmm. But but even online in terms of blogs, I see the word oolong, Wulong, interchangeable with oolong, Oolong, and it's a lot of times it's the pinging versus the English terminology for the T.
Yep.
And
the original butchered romanization is oolong, whereas the true Hanyu pinyin, the actual academic accepted word for oolong is wulong. And you'll find that most of the big time tea scholarly types are trying to veer away from using the double O and going with the woo instead.
oh, so it's more closer aligned to the pinging of the word, so it's closer to the origin.
More hoity-toity, push glasses up, push glasses up.
I need to bring my glasses on so we can have a nerd off.
A nerd off. So you're just disguising that you have perfect eyesight.
Oh, I am blind without contacts. I'm blind
See,
as
I can't wear
blind as a
contacts.
bat. Yeah.
I am
well,
as
the problem
blind
is,
as a geriatric cow in a field near a cliff.
that's
I am
intense.
bovine blind.
That's a little intense.
I know, and man, that was quite the segue. Where do we go
Yeah.
from like talking about oolongs to blind cattle?
Yeah, we were talking about oolong. Well, so I actually, it's very difficult for me to wear glasses because my nose doesn't have a very high bridge. Okay, anyways, back to oolong.
On that one more note, I can't put contacts in my eyes because my eyes start to flutter every time something comes near it. I don't know if it's just anything coming near my eye that I just say, don't poke, ah! I tried like once, maybe twice, but it never took. So I'm like, forget it.
So the second you put contacts on, things are kind of just flying towards you.
Yeah. So I accepted my nerd specs with pride, derision, and whatever else.
Yeah, they're kind of
back
like safety
to
glasses. They're doubling as safety glasses. And also, your reaction is instinct, so don't write that off. It's all good.
It's an actual condition, but yeah. Moving on.
Moving on. So, in terms of oolong, right? So we were on the terms oolong, Wulong, versus oolong, Oolong. But actually, online, a lot of times I just see the Oolong.
Now here's the question: is what would you prefer? Would you prefer the W or would you prefer the oo?
So when I first started drinking and reading and sharing info about tea, I would always write it as Wulong. Only because only because I did feel a little snobby. Where are my glasses? I need them for because I was thinking like, no, oolong is it's traditionally like the pinging is Wulong, and so I don't know what this other word Oolong is. If they want to write oolong, they need to write it in the correct form, that it's referencing the correct pinging and the characters. So
it's woo, not oo.
Excuse me, but this tea's great and all, but we need to talk. So initially, my gut reaction was always to emphasize Wulong, and but now I accept that Oolong is more of the Western way, the Western name for this type of semi-oxidized, heavily bruised and and withered tea. So I don't get offended if it's Oolong. I've kind of accepted that both exist in the in the space of tea, and so that's kind of where I stand on the terminology. But how about you? Do you have a preference?
I'm sticking with the double O for now. It's just easy to type.
It's 2 letters, Geoff.
Yeah, but one is typing one letter twice as opposed to typing 2 different letters. I'm saving time.
That's true.
I know it's a stupid reason, but it really is just a matter of that. And I just like the double O just looks more playful. I know that is not a snobby reason or a scholastic reason, I should say, to prefer the improper romanization of the word, but it's the way it is. But if they were actually to come up with a legitimate category that is distinct from Oolongs to include the semi-oxidized teas, then I could get behind doing the Oolong as being the traditionals and the Oolongs as being the semi-oxidized.
The semi-oxidized, so the Wulong would be the Wuyi, Anshi, and Taiwanese, more traditional, withered and bruised and oxidized Oolong. And then anything else that is only going through oxidation is just Oolong.
Is just Oolong. I mean, granted, that would probably confuse the normal everyday Joe and Jane schmo consumer.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I think it might what's the term, like, break the internet in terms of Oolong, all of the wikis out there, and any blogger who had ever written about Oolong will have to, like, go back into their backlog of 8 years and, like, I need to change everything, replace everything that is OOL, you know?
And that's also the reason why I have not adopted the WU, is because I don't want to go through my backlog. I have a 10-year archive. If you're talking reviews and then my blog itself, there's a long time there.
10 years is a while. 10 years is a while. That's a lot of posts to.
A decade of writing about tea not only makes me feel old, but it also makes me feel old and tired. And when you're old and tired, you don't want to go back and correct 10-year archives worth of spelling mistakes based upon a opinion decision. You just want to take a nap.
But if you were to make this distinction, it would come back to maybe this episode. Be like, Geoff, you're the one who proposed it.
I know. And now that I am on record as saying I'm a double O guy, people will be like, well, now that you have a video and an audio presence, you need to make a choice. I'm a Libra. We don't make choices.
You want both.
I know that the WU is correct, but the other one's just more whimsical, I guess, and easier to type.
So admittedly, I like the look of the Oolong. The Oolong. It looks nicer as a word. Oolong
it's cuter.
It's cuter. It is cuter. It has all the it has the nice round, friendly shapes. The W is such an aggressive shape. Really.
I mean, it basically looks like German architecture done as a letter.
Yep.
I mean, it looks like flying buttresses. Like, you expect that shape to be in a Gothic cathedral.
I was just thinking about a cathedral when you said that. Well, I guess.
Really?
So. Yeah.
Seeing gargoyles on the
architecture.
parapets.
Yeah, we our architectural terms.
We do.
Yeah, we know what's up.
I don't. I don't at all.
You said buttress. You know something.
I just like the word buttress because it sounds like a butt dress.
That's also out there now.
That is our big takeaway from this episode. Butt dress.
If you're wondering about oolong versus oolong, forget all of that. What you need to focus on today is the word buttress.
But what is your stance on butt dresses?
Maybe we can talk about that after the break.
Direct the hate mail here, not there.
That's Jeff Norman at Steve Stories. His handle is
buttdresses@gmail.com.
I swear we're talking about oolong.
Yeah, we're still on oolong. Oh gosh, yeah, we need. So
yeah, let's take a quick break, and I'll chat with you in a few minutes.
Cool.
Okay, sounds good.
Hi there, I'm David.
And I'm Kate.
And we're the hosts of another Zelda podcast.
There are so many good podcasts out there, and some of them in particular concern The Legend of Zelda.
That's right, Kate, and we are another one of them. That is actually the name of our show, Another Zelda Podcast.
And in our show in particular, we talk about some of our favorite dungeons, characters, boss battles. We have top 10 lists.
Yeah, we do deep dives on game design and production aspects of the different Zelda games.
And we talk about our own experiences. We do some review episodes, talk about our challenges, our struggles, and our victories.
That's right. Really just almost anything that has to do with Zelda, we like to talk about it. A new episode comes out every other Friday, and you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and YouTube.
And you can also check out our episodes on our website, anotherzeldapodcast.com.
That's right. All right, we will see you there.
Okay, bye.
Hey everyone, and we're back from break. And before the break, we were talking about oolong versus oolong in terms of what defines a traditional oolong from Ui, which is a dark, spirally long oolong, a little heavier in the oxidation, and it looks like a dark dragon. And also a more modern oolong from Enshi or Taiwan, which is a lighter oxidized oolong. It's more green in color, and the shape is usually in a little ball. And so Jeff and I were talking about that type of oolong definition versus a looser term definition, oolong, which is a tea that only goes through the oxidation process, and that itself defines it as an oolong, which is not the traditional form of oolong.
Which is incorrect.
And so we were discussing should this new oolong or this new oolong that only goes through the oxidation have its own categorization. So that would be, I feel like maybe there should be a new category for this type of new style of oolong.
I agree.
And so this is a lot of Darjeelings, actually. I know you had put something on our show notes about this Darjeeling that is also kind of called an oolong.
Well,
in terms of oxidation.
The article that I placed in there was done by a good friend of mine, good vendor friend of mine, Niraj Lama, who I actually finally met in person at World Tea Expo.
Hey, that's awesome.
And he wrote an article back in 2013 that was explaining the process in which first flush Darjeelings go through. Because Darjeelings before resembled more what autumnal Darjeelings are now, which is basically coarser leaf, coarser processing, full oxidation, and that's about it.
Yep.
And a lot of old-timey tea drinkers prefer that form of Darjeeling, but the Germans wanted to emphasize more of the aromatics, the natural aromatics that are present in the leaf material prior to full oxidation. I mean, oxidation basically happens as soon as like the leaf is damaged in any way. So if a bug bites the leaf, then it'll start to oxidize. But what they do is after they've done the picking, they want to keep the greener aspects intact, and so they will oxidize to about 50 or 60%. And then cut it off and then do a heat process and then a flash dry right after. And that's why first flush Darjeelings look like a green tea if you're just observing it on its own, and why the full oxidation thing does not happen until, I mean, in general does not happen until second flush, monsoon flush, and autumnal.
And that's go ahead.
And I tend to like that profile. A lot of people don't, that aren't German, I guess. But
Okay.
I tend to like it because a lot of the floral aspects that can be found in the leaf come through with just the semi-oxidation process. But can they or should they be called a black tea? Because technically they are considered a black tea. I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence on that.
Right. It's interesting because we're talking about this oolong versus the traditional form of processing, this 8+ step of oolong processing versus this new coined term on teas that are technically not an oolong but are also referred to as oolongs. So we're talking about these two things, but it's interesting because in both categories, like with Darjeeling as with oolong, even traditional oolong, there's this old form or this traditional form, which is a more heavily oxidized, this is how it always was.
Yep.
And then this newer form on both accounts in terms of the traditional Chinese and Taiwanese style oolong, or I guess Chinese oolong, and the traditional Indian Darjeeling that has a lighter note overall. So it seems like within the categories themselves, there's also this kind of discourse of well, what is technically an oolong, and should it be categorized as a traditional and a modern within its own category? So it's interesting.
And to further confuse the issue is there are Darjeeling oolongs as well, which are usually prepared or plucked and processed between the months of May and June when the second flushes happen, but are given the same semi-oxidation treatment that a first flush would, but are oxidized just slightly more so that the leaves have a browner appearance and are also rolled more to resemble traditional oolongs.
Oh, so it doesn't actually. So within this faux oolong categories, there is a more clearly defined, like the most oolong of the category.
Yeah.
And
that's
we'll have a
just
chart
the
up
shape
later.
of the leaf. That's not that. There's no bruising or anything else. It's still a semi-oxidized tea, but they roll it. Not exactly like a full-on necktie ball rolled Chinese or Taiwanese appearance, but at least an attempt to do full further rolling than the traditional just twist and go.
So they're skipping all the hard steps.
Pretty much, yeah. Let me see if I can fetch an example. Yeah, I actually have one right here, and this was not
going
something I
into your
planned in
tea
advance.
stash.
Yeah, going into my stash here. All right, hold on. Yeah.
So Geoff
See?
is showing
the
viewers.
Yeah, an attempt to basically roll it. And this was an experimental oolong that I got from a guy who did some business with a smaller Darjeeling outfit. And
Okay.
I actually tried it for the first time yesterday, and it basically didn't taste like an oolong at all, but it was definitely not a typical Darjeeling either.
Right, because a lot of the flavors from an oolong comes out through the withering and bruising process.
Through the
back and forth
bruising,
and the,
yeah, all the juices are percolating.
all the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
All the good stuff from the tea. Yeah, so in terms of the tea that you're drinking is from Nepal.
Yep.
And how did you come across this tea?
The story that behind this is I've actually had teas from this garden, Junchiabari, several times, and I believe the garden is located in the Ilam region. And I believe the garden's owned by two brothers, and I associate with one of the brothers, Lochan Gyawali on Instagram and a few other places. And they do some interesting things at that garden. In fact, a lot of the major factories in Nepal, they do a bunch of weird things. Like Nepal does not have a distinct style yet. For a while there, they basically mimicked what they did in Darjeeling because they had similar profiles. In fact, there were Nepalese teas that were passed off as Darjeelings because Darjeeling did not produce enough to meet demand. And so sometimes Nepalese teas or even just Nepalese leaf were sent to Darjeeling factories to be processed because they had similar characteristics, similar flavor profile, and so on. But there are gardens that are trying to reshape what is considered Nepalese tea, and I believe Junchiabari is one of the ones that are kind of at the forefront of that. And
clearly defining what a Nepalese tea is, giving it its own distinctive, like regional, flavor and
like an Alam regional characteristic or whatever. But I can't say for certain like what a distinct Junchiabari characteristic would be because I've had different teas that have different notes from that garden. They still have the Himalayan muscatel thing going on, but like this air quotes oolong that I'm having from there, it's unlike any of the other ones that I've had before. It basically tastes like a lighter black tea, but with something sweeter to it.
Okay.
And I'm already on steep 4.
Color? And what is the color that you're seeing in your cup right now?
I'm seeing, right now this is steep 4.
Okay.
And I've been steeping these Western style. So each steep has been about 3 minutes long. And each one has been kind of this medium to bold amber profile.
Okay.
Not profile, palette,
nice.
Excuse me.
Right.
And the profile has been grapey and a little smoky and just nice. Just nice.
Oh, the smoky is nice. So before you were saying there's an Indian Darjeeling second flush that is rolled, and that is the quote unquote most oolong of the oolongs that are semi-oxidized only
that I've run into.
So in terms of rolling, do you know if these are So in terms of the rolling process, do you know if that's hand rolled or machine rolled? I'm just curious.
Fried synapse.
I'm just curious.
It depends on the garden. There are those that are passing off certain teas that they produce as oolongs that actually don't go through anything else besides a semi-oxidation phase. Case in point, my favorite tea of all time is considered a Darjeeling oolong. And
is this the Moonlight?
This is the Castleton
Moonlight
Moonlight,
one?
yes. But they do several lots of it, and one of those lots has actually been categorized as a white tea several times. And that's another funny gray area because a white tea that isn't automatically dried after withering goes through oxidation. So white teas actually have a little bit of oxidation to them because they have to be withered and then they have to go through a drying process. But between that transport, some oxidation is going to take place. But if it oxidizes too long, then it starts to turn into this golden tippy sort of thing. And I've run into that in Sri Lanka as well as Nepal, and also from various states in Darjeeling.
Okay. I'm just, I was reading up about the rolling. A lot of it is machine rolled now, but especially in like the Enshi region, the government is actually saying that these machines that do the rolling, like they want to stay away from everything becoming so automated in terms of the processing or the production of oolong. They want to keep a lot of the old traditional ways of processing, and so there's actually a lot of bans on what types of machines can be used, even though there's a lot of new machines on the market. So I was just wondering if there was something similar to that with this new type of semi-oxidized quote unquote oolong.
They're aiming for. I mean, there are gardens that do micro lots that are hand rolled, and those usually fetch a higher price. Those are usually like either private commissions or just examples of what they can do. They're basically like a premium collection kind of thing. Castleton Moonlight, Imperial EX something or other falls in that category. But most of the time,
what a name!
In general, though, most of the rolling is done via machine. Rolling and cutting are done by machine.
Okay.
And a lot of the tea regions in Nepal, in Darjeeling, in Assam, in Nilgiri are actually embracing more mechanization because the current estate model in a lot of these regions isn't sustainable.
Okay. That's so they're doing more mechanization, whereas China is trying to move away from.
There's been some resistance to that, but that seems to be that seems to be the direction they're going. For instance, in Assam, the most of the output, tea output coming out of Assam was not from the larger traditional estates, but from small holder farms that sell leaf to factories. Basically, the bought leaf factory model. This was the first year, or last year was the first year where that produced more. I don't know the exact figures, but I believe that had more of an influence than the traditional 200-year-old estate model or plantation model that was in effect before.
Yeah, that's probably a little harder to sustain.
Yep.
So I know we talked about the two different types of oolongs, but in terms of a traditional or even modern real oolong, there's a thing I'm reading that it's an aged oolong, and I don't know if you've come across this at all, but it's basically taking a modern oolong, a tieguanying, and you are drying. You're basically in the first few years you continuously like dry it like once a year to kind of seal the shape and the flavor. And then after 10 years of continuously like lightly drying, it basically holds its shape and flavor, and you can just store it however.
The aging thing is kind of a happy accident, kind of like the way that aging heicha became a thing. Because aged oolongs didn't take off as a favorable category until probably within the last 15 to 20 years. And that trend started in Taiwan because there were gardens, processors, wholesalers, and vendors that still had extra stock of tea. So what they did is they basically kept that around and as airtight and as well stored as possible so that it would retain some of the characteristics. And most of the time they would basically sell it locally to older tea people, because a lot of older tea people in Taiwan, they basically assume, well, I'm already old, I might as well be drinking old tea. But a lot of people were also finding that that not only did the characteristics of oolong change, but also strengthen or become more nuanced as they developed in age. In China, more so than Taiwan, this also led to certain teas being re-roasted after about a decade each time. In other cases, like for like aged baozhongs, they basically just tried to keep it as well stored, preferably dry stored as they could. I've had some aged baozhongs, and those are interesting.
Yeah, and I think so. For you and I think we talked about we'll actually do a mini deep dive into tea storage in a later episode.
Yeah,
because as we've previously mentioned, you and I both store our teas in fairly not in the most strict of tea storage ways.
Not at all.
They're only stored in the sense they're in a box. That is our storage right now. So we're gonna do
or in a bag,
or in a shopping bag, a paper shopping bag.
Yeah. In this case, all of my oolong is in a bag, so I can easily access it.
Nice. So it's in one spot.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do a mini deep dive into tea storage on like pores, and I know I talked about it's really humid in Chicago and whether or not that's good or not. But back to oolongs. So you're having an oolong from Nepal. I'm having an oolong from Anxi in China, and I don't know if you've heard of Zeelong. It's actually an oolong from New Zealand.
Oh yeah, I've had it.
Yeah, you've had it, right?
Yep.
And it's great.
It's wonderful.
So mini story on Zeelong and how it started, which I think is in the grand scheme of tea and transporting tea and starting a new tea farm. It's a pretty interesting one. So Vincent Chen, he basically brought these tea plants from Taiwan to New Zealand. And if you haven't tried Zeelong, I would highly suggest it. It has a really amazing flavor, and the leaves are so large, and just the flavor is really great.
Days plump leaves.
Yeah, they're huge. And so he had brought these tea plants from Taiwan, and he couldn't bring them in with the roots. So he cut off all of the roots because it's technically you can't, bring right. So he cut off all of the roots, and he basically saved 1,500 cuttings of this tea plant. And through the 10 months of quarantine that these plants sat in while they were on their way of entering New Zealand, only 130 of these plants survived. Yeah. And so basically, when you're drinking a Zeelong, which is technically still a new oolong. Yep. A Taiwanese oolong. So it does go through the correct processes of defining whether or not it is an oolong.
It is. They go through all the bells and whistles to be an oolong.
Yep. All the steps. So after the 10 months of quarantine, 130 plants or cuttings survived. And so when you're drinking a Zeelong, you're basically drinking the strongest tea plants that survived. The best of the best, basically. And all of the other hundreds of tea cuttings that didn't make it, you're drinking the largest leaves, the strongest plants, the strongest cuttings. So for me, so I've tried a little bit of Zeelong, and it's absolutely great. And the fact that it comes from New Zealand is really just an interesting part of the story.
Mhm.
But for me personally, a lot of the oolongs, the true oolongs that I drink is from China or Taiwan.
Right.
And so when you have an oolong, are you usually having a semi-oxidized oolong, or are you having a semi-oxidized, all of the processed, bruised, and withered oolong?
It's about 60-40. 60 being the Oolong, 40 being the semi-oxidized. Like today I had a Baiji Guan from 7 Cups, which I'm almost out of, and I'm going to cry because that's my favorite Wu Yi Oolong ever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so good. It's basically like somebody just accidentally took a full vanilla bean and mixed it in with a bunch of Wu Yi leaves and said, "This will pass off just fine."
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yep. And so that's what I drank yesterday. That's what I was drinking half the time last week. And the other 40% of the time I'm drinking semi-oxidized teas because at least my body registers them as being less caffeinated than black tea. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. So when you are writing about these semi-oxidized teas, how do you refer to them?
I just call them oolongs, or.
I see.
I know. I'm a bad boy.
So we're grouping them in as oolongs. That's fair. Well, I mean, for each their own, right? Depending on how they categorize oolongs.
Unless you want to be like the Makabari Garden in Darjeeling and call your oolong a Darj oolong, which is just a... I kind of like that name, but it is ridiculously long.
Darj oolong. I like it. It has a nice flow to it.
It does have a nice flow to it.
Yeah, it has a nice flow, and it correctly defines...
I think we might have found a way to split the difference. We make it regionally specific.
Should we trademark this?
We make it regionally specific, and like oolongs from Nepal should be called Nepoolongs, Darjeelongs, Assam
Can we
oolongs,
patent this process right now?
Nilgoolongs for Nilgiri ones, Indi oolongs for
not that
Indonesian ones that don't go through the traditional process.
Indulongs?
Ones from Sri Lanka would be Ceylongs.
Sulongs. Sri oolongs. Yeah, that is one way to do it. That is one way to do it.
You just take the long and you ignore the woo and the oo entirely.
We're just breaking up the category completely. We're ignoring all traditional forms of naming.
Yeah.
Oolongs.
Just make it subcategories.
Stripping it down. Stripping it down and building it back up. That's what we're doing here.
I hadn't thought of that. Even though that's kind of a dorkier Band-Aid on the issue, it kind of works in a whimsical Ghibli-esque sort of way.
So it does kind of work, but what it doesn't tackle is what if a region starts doing the bruising process for their oolong?
Which has already happened. I mean, like you were mentioning, Zilong, which they're not in Taiwan, but they're doing it with the traditional Taiwanese processes. There's also a garden in Indonesia, even though a lot of Indonesian gardens will do their tea process the same way as the Sri Lankans, the Indians, the Nepalese, basically, factory thing doing its thing. There's a garden called Harandong, which uses Taiwanese cultivars and does the whole thing, the bruising, the rolling, the semi-oxidation, and the kill green.
Okay, so let me ask you one final question. For you, when you drink an oolong, are you drinking it for flavor or are you drinking it for health benefits?
I'm drinking it for happiness.
There you go.
Because
The answer is not.
traditional oolong is straight up happy juice.
Yeah.
There is no better feeling in the world than being high on an oolong. And I don't mean like high as in the illucid high. I mean, I'm still in control of my faculties, but I'm kind of giggling and singing at the same time while I'm doing my arduous task. Mood.
We have outtakes of that.
I know you do.
It's going to be great. You don't believe us, but they'll be posted. They'll be shared.
I just went on a rant about butt dresses and buttresses, so
You did.
this whole thing is a blackmail. But
it's a massive public blackmail.
To be fair, there's also kilts, so you could say that there's tush kilts for guys. I mean, let's go with equity here.
Yeah, equality for all. Yeah.
Equality for all. And I apologize.
So
no, I don't.
No, you did. I was like, no, you don't. Don't lie to my face. So for me, when I drink an oolong, it's for flavor. Though there are a lot of people and articles that claim that oolong has a lot of health benefits in terms of helping with like tooth decay, cholesterol, metabolism. But that's, it's right. Yep.
Don't care.
And
Don't care.
maybe this is something that we cover in a possible future episode where we take a look at these quote unquote like health benefits of tea versus drinking tea. I think for both of us, we enjoy tea mainly for the flavor and for the pure enjoyment of the process of steeping and making the tea and just enjoying the different types of flavors from the different regions.
And having tea with people.
And having tea with people. Which on your blog, you wrote a blog article about the World Tea Expo, which ended on this really nice note about tea is really about enjoying it with people. Yeah. It was, after I read it, I was like, oh, that's so, so sweet. A little bit. I'm trying to get a little corny at the end of the show, but it was a really nice, heartfelt post. So
yeah,
the
best
look at
best tea times I've ever had have been with people, and that also brings up something that we could also bring up in future episodes is the relationship between the tea community and social media. Because, I mean, there are a lot of articles that deride social media, but the thing of it is that because tea is such a specific niche appreciation still, and particularly in Western countries, most of the time we're having tea alone. Unless we happen to drag our significant others or pets into the fray.
Are you dragging your cat into this?
I don't have a cat, but I have my roommates. Their cats have been kind of curious about my brews, particularly when they have almond milk in them. That's beside the point. That sounds very old manny. What I'm trying to get at is that a lot of the relationships that I've fostered in the tea community have been over social media, and when I finally do meet them in person, it's almost like we've known each other for years, particularly when we're sharing a cup.
Yeah, and actually, Geoff, you and I met over social media.
Yeah,
you and I met over Instagram.
Yeah,
so there's that.
I'm not faulting it. And now here we are ranting about oolongs, woolongs, and butt dresses until the cows come home.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to add butt dress to that list. It's like if he doesn't mention that, this episode is a wash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Great. So if our listeners want to get a hold of you so they can ask you more about your experience at World Tea Expo, or want to find out more about what you're drinking throughout the week, how can they get a hold of you?
I am the Lazy Literatus on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, G+, Tumblr, YouTube. Basically, look for that, and you'll probably see my face, whether you want to or not.
You added G+. That's a new one.
I forgot that was there.
I think, fair. That's fair. And if our listeners would like to comment on anything that we've talked about today, or reach either Geoff or myself, you can reach us at the TFix at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So, Geoff, this has been so much fun, and I am, yes, always so much fun. So I will catch you next week.
Indeed.
All right, talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please subscribe and rate the show on iTunes, YouTube, and Google Play. This helps other listeners find our show, and if you'd like, please leave us a review. Thanks!